So, a while back, I redid my first Doctor Who video ever by discussing 5 unpopular opinions I had about the show. And I would like to do that again here, but with some new ones. Hence, this being 5 more unpopular opinions, and not just... yeah, whatever, you get it. Let's begin. Series 2 is so overhated. Yeah, this is something that even to this day I don't really understand. Despite the fact that I've been active in this fandom for 3 years at this point, I still don't fully understand why Series 2 has been turned on so much. It was absolutely adored when it came out, then suddenly recently it has been turned on, with some people even calling it the worst series in the revival. But let's just get real here. In no reality are Series 5, 6, 7, 10, 11 or 12 better than Series 2. Not a chance in hell. The closest to even being better is Series 5, but even then, Series 2 has so many better episodes in it than Series 5 does. Series 2 has some absolute banger stories, including the first Doctor-led story ever, the best usage of the Cybermen in the modern world, a fantastic finale, a super interesting exploration of the concept of the devil himself, and a few other brilliant stories. The 10th Doctor is absolutely fantastic throughout as well, stealing the show in every scene he's in. It's honestly a surprise that this was his first go at playing the role, because he plays it so naturally. And speaking of 10, the character work in Series 2 is great for all of these characters. Yes, all of them. So 10, obviously, with his perfect character, starts his arc here, showing us him at the peak of his life, as part of the Tyler family and in love with Rose Tyler. And love or hate this dynamic, it's important for 10's character, as once he loses them, it sets him on his downward spiral, excellently shown in Series 3. And this is hinted at earlier in the series as we see how angry and aggressive he gets when he thinks she's dead or lost. And it's not only 10 who has a great character in this series. Both Jackie and Mickey have great character exploration in this series. Love and Monsters, while being a shitty episode, still is absolutely carried by the scenes with Jackie. They all add another layer of depth to her character as we see more of the companion who gets left behind. We see more how she feels about it. And when you think about it, this is something that should have been done years ago. But then again, I don't know what I was expecting since the majority of Classic Who characters just lack dimension. Mickey's development in this series is also fucking fantastic, and this series completes his growth from Series 1. From Mickey the Idiot to Mickey the Chad, and it's excellently set up and shown throughout the series. Even Rose's characterization is much better than people give it credit for, with the obsession and becoming like the Doctor arc shown greatly here, with it leading to her eventual downfall. I have a whole video on this, by the way, you should totally watch it. But also with Rose, it is undeniable that she's nowhere near as interesting or good as she was in Series 1. And I feel like that's where most people's complaints with this series come from. How much you like this series entirely depends on how much you like 10 and Rose. But even with my most recent rewatch of Series 2 only being a month before this audio was being filmed, I don't understand the hate. Both David Tennant and Billie Piper have such natural great chemistry, I struggle to see how people find them annoying to watch, other than the points of them being irresponsible or tone deaf, but that was the point. Seriously, this series has so much better stuff to offer than the majority of the revival and probably like 95% of Classic Who, but it gets overgeneralized so much. You can even see it in the episode of the podcast with me and Sam. Sam, who thought he absolutely despised this series, upon rewatch saw so much more quality in it than everyone gives it credit for. I hate to describe it as this because it's going to come off as really condescending no matter how I word it, but it honestly just seems like the same situation with the Snyder Cut, where people say that Snyder Cut is better than Justice League, but can never actually explain why the Snyder Cut is better. The hatred for Series 2 honestly kind of seems like the same sort of hive mind situation, to be honest. The Master was an absolute joke until the revival. Now this one is going to get me a bit of flack, because I'm aware of how absolutely beloved Delgado and even the Alien Master are. So let me just get it out the way that Delgado is okay as the Master. He's a very charming and charismatic character who gets constantly dragged down by being in repetitive stories and constantly made out to be a joke and inferior to the Doctor, while the show is also constantly trying to play up how great and how much of a threat he is. Seriously, all the Delgado Master stories, or at least all the ones I've seen, play out exactly the same. The Master tries to get control of Thing or use Thing for power. Thing turns against him. Him and the Doctor have to work together to try and stop it. Rinse and fucking repeat. And it just gets old so quickly. But I don't hate Delgado as the Master. But to act as if he's the best Master, or even the best written Master, is just wrong. Same applies to Ainley. The Ainley Master is straight up a Saturday morning cartoon villain. Seriously, his entire motivation is literally just, look how evil I am, Doctor. Seriously, he is beyond lame. His character is a complete joke, and in concept, I absolutely hate a villain whose existence and presence is this lame. However, something that absolutely carries this cheesy over-the-top character is Ainley's charismatic and lovable performance, because, much like Delgado, he's playing a lame character who's constantly made out to be a super big deal. Despite me loving these two actors playing this role so well, undeniably the character and the writing for said character is absolute joke tier, without a shadow of a doubt. Now fast forward to the Sim Master and Russell T Davies, who finally give this character some much long overdue depth. Instead of just being cheesy and implying a threatening nature, the Sim Master clearly uses this cheesy persona to try and hide his deeper, darker and more tortured nature, excellently shown in The End of Time and more so in the Series 3 finale. And right off the bat, in his first proper scene, they show how threatening he is, and how much he's capable of by having him strand the Doctor at the end of the universe. And when he gets back to the present, it's revealed that the Master had been scheming in the background of the series for the entire time, and it's a fantastic payoff for this arc. And instead of the Master trying to use the power of someone else, and have it backfire so him and the Doctor have to work together, or he's just doing something evil for the sake of being evil, his first plan has him take over the world as part of a plan to make the universe his own, just for revenge because the Doctor was the only one who survived the Time War, which is already so much more depth than anything that came before. And then his second plan, and this is when he's absolutely batshit deranged, and he can still formulate a plan and think on the spot, he takes over the entire planet at a stretch of 48 hours at the very, very most after his resurrection, and plans to find out what's the noise inside his head that's been ruining his life so much. And when he finds out it's the Time Lords, he plans out his instant revenge, planning to bring back the Time Lords and take them over. Then when this backfires, he kills Rassilon and saves the Doctor's life. However, unlike in Classic Who, where the Doctor and the Master team up because he fucked up and he never learns from it, because it just happens every other week, it works here, because the entire story has been building their friendship back up, bit by bit throughout, and the Doctor just had the biggest opportunity to kill the Master and stop him forever, and take the easy way out, which he would have all right to do because of what the Master did, and he still doesn't, because he values what little respect they have for each other, even if it's shattered. And the Sim Master, after seeing that newfound level of respect, repays it by killing Rassilon and saving his life. In the Sim Master's two stories that I will acknowledge, he does more for the Master as a character in 4 episodes than Classic Who did in 18 years. That not only speaks to how little Classic Who really did with this character, besides him being generic evil Doctor, but it also just speaks to truly how much Russell T Davies and John Sim did for this character. Not to mention that John Sim to this day is by far the best actor to play this character. And then there's Missy, who I'm currently in a bit of a limbo state with because of where my reviews are at that I'm working on for my second channel and main channel review. So this is going to be purely based off memory. As far as I can remember, besides her pointless appearance in the Series 9 opener, Missy is one of the better incarnations as the Master. She's nowhere near as good as John Sim, but nowhere near as generic and or boring as the classic Masters. But what they try to do with her doesn't really work because it comes off as really unearned and out of nowhere. Not to mention that in her final story, they ruin the Sim Master's character completely by having him literally become a generic classic Master as a character, just to show how far Missy has come, which is really detrimental for both characters, as the Sim Master could have been replaced by an Ainley stand-in in this story, and I wouldn't hate it nearly as much as I do. And I mean, we don't even need to talk about the worst Master ever, so let's just move on. Or if you're super curious, watch my Series 12 reviews, I rip my shit in those. John Sim is, and most likely will always be, the best Master.
Get out of the way. You did this to me! All of my life! You made me!
Was it fucking cool? Absolutely was fucking cool. Was it worth it?
Both Classic Who and New Who fail the Cybermen constantly. The Cybermen, as we know them, are some of the greatest universe villains ever, with such a creative, dark idea that I'm honestly still surprised that this show could get away with. But to say that the Cybermen are even close to being consistent would just be a complete lie, to be honest. Because just like the Daleks, they are constantly shoved in bad stories. They are misused and misunderstood constantly. And unlike before, this bullying isn't just for Classic Who. New Who does this shit constantly as well. Now, in Classic Who, the 60s Cybermen stories, from what I've seen, are fine. I've only seen Tomb of the Cybermen, which is good but overrated, and The Invasion, which is pretty fucking fantastic, but the pacing sucks. But the second we enter the 70s, we get the issue of Revenge of the Cybermen, which is without a doubt the worst story in Season 12. Revenge of the Cybermen is the destiny of the Daleks for the Cybermen, completely destroying their reputation for years to come because of how truly terrible this story is, completely misunderstanding the Cybermen, making them robots instead of humans trying to survive and convert. The, for some reason, beloved Earthshock does this as well, because in that story they're also just completely generic robots. Like, their plan in this story is just to destroy Earth. Why the fuck would the Cybermen want to destroy Earth instead of trying to convert it? Classic Who sort of sets this downward spiral in the right direction in Attack of the Cybermen, but even then that story's nothing special, but at least we do see some conversion for once. And the very last Cybermen story in Classic Who was Silver Nemesis. Fucking Silver Nemesis. And this story, even if the Cybermen weren't shoved in it unnecessarily, is a complete fucking joke and an embarrassment to not only Doctor Who, but Classic Who. Seriously, this is a Season 24 level story. It is truly awful. The entire thing makes absolutely no sense, and the Cybermen's weakness is gold. Truly ridiculous shite. But it isn't just Classic Who. New Who does this shit constantly as well. Now, the early 2000s actually don't really have this issue. The Cybermen are used excellently in the mid-Series 2 two-parter, the Series 2 finale, and eventually in the next Doctor. But the showcase of that massive fuck-off unnecessary Cybermen in the next Doctor was a shadow of what's to come, and it was the beginning of the end for this villain's reputation. As before they even get a dedicated story in the Moffat era, they play second fiddle to every other villain, were defeated by James Corden in The Power of Love. Yes, that actually did happen, and yes, it is an embarrassment. I'm so sorry, Rose. I guess Jackie just didn't love hard enough. Ugh. And then they do get their first dedicated story, Nightmare in Silver, which, in concept, is actually a really inventive and creative idea, as it is Neil Gaiman, so that was expected. But the execution of this story is absolutely terrible, with these two annoying shits taking up way too much screen time, Mr. Clever being a tarnish on Matt Smith's career, usual standard Series 7 Clara pretentious cringe, and a classic Series 7-esque Deus Ex Machina, where to resolve this issue they just fly off the planet and blow it up. Could you actually think of a less creative way to resolve a Doctor Who story? This story at least had potential to be good, but Moffat's tampering ruined it. Speaking of Moffat's tampering and ruin it, the next story, he actually doesn't do that. Well, he kind of does, because the next story, which is the Series 8 finale, he does use them effectively in a creepy way in the first part, but in the second, they're kind of just generic robots again, because besides Danny, they don't really do anything significant in the end. However, he absolutely redeems all his wrongdoings by the end of his era, because World Enough in Time is the perfect Cyberman story, using them in the way they were meant to be used way back in the original 60s story, and World Enough and Time on its own is one of the greatest Cyberman stories. We don't talk about the second half. So while Moffat definitely ruined the Cybermen to some extent, he at least set them on the right foot before he left the show, and I'm glad that some other talentless writer hasn't came in and made them generic stupid robots again, because that would be fucking ridiculous, wouldn't it? Why I think Jodie Whittaker should stay. Now this one might be bizarre, especially considering several statements that I've made in the past, but at time of me recording this, recent rumours that Whittaker might be leaving at the end of Series 13, I'm honestly just disappointed and confused by the news. Mostly just confused by all the people who are happy about this, because even if Jodie leaves, Chibnall is staying, and it's his fault that 13 is the worst Doctor. It's not Jodie's fault. I'm going to keep saying that 13 is the worst Doctor, because Ruth Doctor just isn't the Doctor in any reality. But yeah, despite 13 being the worst Doctor, I want to see Whittaker stay on the show longer. While tactically for the market, and this is probably a terrible idea since a majority of the fans rightfully despise her, and she needs the 10th Doctor to even grasp onto any relevance in the expanded media stuff, but I want to see 13 written under another showrunner. I know as a fact that there's potential there, because if she was written how she was written in most of Haunting, then I wouldn't even mind her so much. In fact, Jodie is really, really good in that story, and Jodie Whittaker definitely is a capable actor. You never know. Maybe under the right writing and directing, 13 could be one of the best Doctors. But we'll never know that if she leaves and Chibnall stays. I would have loved to see Jodie as the Doctor when Russell was in charge. He could have written her excellently. And despite how terrible of a showrunner Moffat is, he wrote for 13 once, and it was better than anything we've seen in Series 11 or 12. And he wrote the first female Master, who is better than most of them. Not that that's very hard, but you know what I mean. And if Jodie does leave after Series 13, what kind of legacy is the 13th Doctor gonna have? Well, as Critica Drinket put it, a legacy of failure. If she leaves and the next Doctor is a man, hell, even if the next Doctor isn't a man, the first female Doctor in history is going to be seen as that one terrible attempt to rip off 10 and 11 molded together with the worst run of episodes this show has ever seen. And I don't know about you, but I wouldn't want any Doctor to have a legacy that bad. The only Doctor to even come close to being as bad as 13 beforehand was the 5th Doctor. They both struggle with a lot of the same issues. An actor who didn't know how to handle the role until they left, potentially. Yes, an overstuffed TARDIS not allowing for interesting character dynamics because they're all clambering over each other all the times and the scriptwriters at the time don't know how to handle that many characters. Yes. Terrible run of episodes? Yes. A time slot change? Yes. You get the point. The best possible outcome for 13 is that Chibnall leaves after Series 13, Jodie stays, is absolutely fantastic written under someone else, then she can have a better legacy, and the first female Doctor won't be remembered as a joke. I have a whole podcast episode where me and Sam discuss this. If you want to hear more about our thoughts on this, I'd recommend checking it out. It's one of our longer episodes, but I promise you it's one of our best. Well, it's one of my favourites. Torchwood Series 1's shittiness is greatly over-exaggerated. A little bit of a jump away from Doctor Who for a second to talk about Torchwood, because 4 unpopular Doctor Who opinions and 1 unpopular Torchwood one just isn't as good of a title. But for this section, I would really like to talk about Torchwood Series 1, as I think it gets way too much hate for what it is. And this is something that I can somewhat understand to some extent, because Series 2 and Series 3 of Torchwood are just so fucking good that it kind of just blows the first series out of the water because it doesn't even come close to matching the quality of those two. But most people with this series of Torchwood, a lot like Series 2 of Doctor Who, completely overgeneralize this series and just write it off as shitty, without really explaining why. While with Series 2, it's just blaming Rose without actually explaining why she's a bad character. With this series, it's immature and bad. And while I won't try to deny that the series is immature, because it definitely is a point, to overgeneralize every story as just immature is disingenuous. There's a lot more quality in almost all the stories if you can get past some immaturity and lesbian pandering shit that's in Series 1. But it definitely isn't perfect. I go into much more depth in my Series 1 ranking of Torchwood I made earlier this year. It's the last main channel video made in the old way, so if you can get past some bad audio, I would recommend it as it's one of my better rankings. So, those are 5 more of my unpopular Doctor Who opinions. I hope you enjoyed it, and if you want more, just tell me in the comments below, and tell me how wrong I am in the comments below. Even though I'm completely right, and if you fucking disagree with me, I will literally send Willy Wonka around your house and force him to make a chocolate cat for you. So what a fucking thought.